What was the most heartbreaking thing someone has said to you? My mom and dad got divorced when I was 11. Prior, they owned a 13-acre farm, and truly, I had a fantastic childhood. Post-divorce, I didn't see much of my dad, but he put forth so much effort to be in my life, and that was always important. Last year, when I visited, he asked if he could ask me a question and gave me this sad but scared look and asked, was I a good dad? My heart just shattered. I wonder how long he had doubted himself about being a good father. That question just broke my heart to hear. I had a very elderly gentleman friend. I was about 30. He was in his mid to late 70s. I just loved talking to him. When we talked, I absent-mindedly would rub my hand across his arm. One day, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "You are the first person in 13 years since my wife died, besides a doctor, who has touched me. Nobody likes to touch old people." I cried. He died a couple of months after that. I have never forgotten it. I moved to the US from Asia when I was 11. Had trouble getting used to the culture change. Came home and told my mom that kids were calling me weird. She said, "Have you ever thought that maybe you were weird? Maybe there's a reason why they're calling you that? Maybe you're the problem?" I never opened up to my mom ever again. She had no time for me, clearly. I'm also Asian, and my parents often shrug off problems too, and most of the time they just blame it on you. And then they wonder why you don't talk to them. The guy I thought was my best friend at the time said, "You like my crush, don't you? I'll go out with her and dump her in a couple weeks just because I can. I don't even like her." And he did exactly that and laughed at how I was scared to tell her how I felt. Never knew why he did that. We didn't spoke much after that. My friend was killed in a car accident when his kids were still very young. At his wake, his 4-year-old son went and got a step stool, put it in front of the open casket, then climbed up to where he could reach his dad. He was crying and pulling on his dad's suit. He kept begging him to, "Wake up, Daddy. Please wake up." There wasn't a dry eye in the place. You could hear the entire room of hearts break all at once. I was supposed to die first. My grandfather waking up in the hospital after a car accident that injured him and killed my grandmother. He was a good person, but never a very loving husband, very stingy with money, never wanted to travel or have friends over. She loved life and travel and always wanted to do more than he did. He was older than her. After he realized she was dead in the hospital, he said he had scrimped and saved up all this money in his retirement so that when he was gone, she would never have to worry about money and could do all the traveling and adventuring she wanted. That was how she would know how much he loved her. It was so sad, because he was so heartbroken, because I don't think she ever knew, and because he wasn't brave or loving enough to have that life with her, instead of just hoping she'd have it without him after he was gone. Sad face. "I'm sorry I wasn't there for you more. My dad has always had a drinking problem and was pretty into drugs when I was a kid. I'm his only child, and I lived with my mom till I was 12 and had a pretty rough go of things. My dad wasn't in my life for about a year and a half when I was 7 or so, and things were particularly bad then. Now that I'm 30, once in a while the topic of my childhood will come up when my dad and I talk. He beats himself up pretty bad about not being around, especially when he drinks. Once he just started crying and said those words, and it kind of broke my heart a little. He just can't forgive himself for not being there to take his little girl out of a bad situation. I've told him a million times he has no reason to be sorry, and I forgive him and love him, but I don't think he will ever fully let it go. Complicated, but me and my ex have slept together for a couple months since the breakup, and almost every time we talk, he'd always say how he wants to do things again in the future or how he wants to be with me when we're back home. We're going away to college. The other day, I told him that I'd want to know if he ever changed his mind about it, and he basically told me he never felt that way, and he just said it because he was turned on and in a mood. It just hurt because I was misled for so long. Crazy who makes me the happiest can make me the saddest. This actually just happened this past week. I was volunteering at a food pantry, and there was a 10-year-old in a wheelchair. My group and I were there to help pass out food, and we befriended the little guy. Well, when it was time to leave, he kept begging us not to leave, even though we had to. Turns out he mentioned to one of my group partners that he had no friends, and no one ever wanted to talk to him, just because he was in a wheelchair. Would have to be something my cousin said. My uncle killed himself last September. We were in the middle of his memorial service, and his 4-year-old daughter, who really didn't understand what was going on / didn't realize what death was, shouted out, "That's my daddy," like she was excited to see him. I swear, every one of the 400+ people there burst into tears at that. I asked an always cheerful Alzheimer's patient how she was doing, and instead of her usual giggling pleasantry, she said, "My children visited today, and I couldn't tell them how much I love them and miss them, and I don't know why." It was the only lucid sentence I ever heard from her. Edit. A word. Nobody likes you. My first boss said this to me on my second performance review. By nobody, he meant no manager wants to give me any work. I remember how I instinctively didn't like when I laid eyes on him for the very first time. My instincts were 100% right. 10 years later, I'm in the same field, on a six-figure salary. I'm liked. I fantasize about pouring a glass of red wine on his head. Maybe this will get buried. I have two. Both around the same time in my life, high school. I made my dad mad one time, and he told me, "You're going to grow up, and you're going to be so mediocre. You're going to do mediocre things, and you're going to live a mediocre life." Another time I made my mom mad, and she then immediately turns to my sister, for at the time, and said, "I hope you don't grow up to be like your sister." Just to give this context, it was because they found out I had a boyfriend at the ripe young age of 14. Obviously harmless stuff for us as kids, but they livid and assumed the worst. He's so handsome and tall and sexy. I think I found my soulmate. To give a bit of context, I was an 18-year-old with a huge crush on this Russian chick. She had these amazing storm gray eyes I could just stare into. She and I had been close friends for 3 years, and for those 3 years my crush had been unrequited. Finally, when she was about to go home to Russia for a holiday, I decided to confess. I drove her to the airport and confessed that I really liked her, had liked her for a while. Would she please be my girlfriend? She was happy, smiled, and kissed me and promised to come back to me. 3 months later, she cut all contact the month she came back. She came with a dude she had met on the flight back. They'd hit it off, and he'd asked her to go out with him, and she'd originally declined, but eventually gave in. I was 19 at the time, and was devastated, though I kept on being her pillar of support for an entire year. I had a friend who was really close but suffered depression, but I tried to do everything I could to help all of the time. I went on a holiday, and all was well, until I get a Snapchat of her bleeding arms with "This is all your fault" written over it. And I'm not a very touchy-feely person, but that really got me. We both just graduated from the same college. We're now living in different states. I thought she was the girl I was going to marry. We had been dating for almost 2 years and talked many times about spending our lives together. Last night, she told me that the distance is too hard and she needs some time to figure out what she wants. I asked her if any small part of her thought that what we had was worth fighting for. She couldn't say yes. So I'd have to say that being told that I'm not worth fighting for is the most heartbreaking thing that's ever been said to me. You're too fat to be attractive. I've gotten this in several different ways over the last several years, many of which were from people that I talked and laughed with for many hours over phone conversations, emails, and text messages over several months. Then, they meet me in person, and that's what I get told right before they drop contact with me. It hurts a little less each time, but it still stings for months or years afterwards. This is going to get buried, but when my ex and I broke up, he told me that he had stopped loving me not long after we moved in together. That was 3 years prior. 3 fucking years of lies. I'm with a wonderful man now, and he assures me that he'll never do something like that, but there's a little voice in my head that sometimes whispers, "What if he stopped loving you, and he's hiding it too?" Those words haunt me. When I was 4 years old, my grandma was diagnosed with brain cancer. She absolutely loved me, more than anything in the world. One day, I was standing at the bottom of her stairs, and she looked at me and said, "Spicy_Clover, I got a phone call today." I asked who called her. God called me. He said I have to go visit him soon. I then asked when she was going to be back, and she turned and walked away. It wasn't until I was about 13 years old did I realize she was trying to tell me she was going to die. My dad was unemployed for quite a while. After losing his original job, he got a little too comfortable and also became depressed and refused to look for work. My parents fought a lot because of it. Finally, he got the motivation and applied for a great job and got it. I called him to congratulate him. I said, "How do you feel, Dad?" And he cried and said, "I feel like I'm finally worth something." It broke my heart to think that he ever felt worthless. It wasn't so much what was said, but how it was said. At the time, I was dating a girl who I knew had had an abusive childhood, but I didn't really know the extent of what she had gone through. We were in my apartment cleaning or doing dishes or something, and she dropped a coffee mug and the handle broke off. I was mildly annoyed, but wasn't really upset. It's just a mug after all, and nothing a little Gorilla Glue probably couldn't fix. She, however, was frozen in terror, and she looked at me and immediately, almost instinctively said, "Please don't hit me." Hearing that, especially being a kid who had a great childhood, was like a punch in the gut. I just wanted to hold her and make every bad thing that had ever happened to her disappear. It was absolutely heartbreaking to know this wonderful girl had that instinctive reflex literally beaten into her as a child. Back when I was a hospice nurse, I was visiting a home of a patient whose family obviously cared about him, but had been gathered in the house for weeks, whispering to each other, holding a vigil in the front room while he was mostly alone most of the time in a basement bedroom. The patient was normally not very chatty, but one visit he said to me, I love it when you visit. I thanked him and asked why. He said, "You're the only person who doesn't treat me like I'm dying." Ouch, my heart feels. But he really taught me a good lesson. And from that point forward, I made more of a conscious effort to be sure my visits with my patients allowed time for them to be them and talk about whatever they wanted and joke with them if they felt up to it, and just left time to enjoy stories and conversation with them if they were in the mood. I would try to demonstrate to families like his that it is okay to still enjoy the company of the person who is dying, and it is not disrespectful or irreverent to do so. That patient helped me be a better nurse. He might be married to your mother, but that man will never be your father. You will never call him dad, and he will never love you as his daughter. He's going to take your mom away and have lots of new babies, and they're going to love them more than you. They're going to forget about you, and when they do, I will be the one left to pick up your broken pieces. My biological father said this to me at age 9. I did not speak to him again for 10 years. My stepdad is my dad. He loves me unconditionally and raised me into the person I am today. I was having a great day, just drove back from Comic-Con, all pumped up. I stopped and got treats from Panera for my girlfriend. We don't have one locally, but I passed on my way back, and I picked her up. She was kind of distant, didn't really ask how my day was, so in the car I was telling her. She was on her phone, almost completely ignoring me. I asked her if he could listen for a bit, but she still kind of was ignoring me. "Hey, can we talk for a minute?" I asked her, which in her family is code for "let's have a real discussion." She turns to me, says, "Honestly, no, because I'm having a good day, and you talking about your feelings is just going to bum me out," so I silently drove the rest of the way to the restaurant. Last year, I dropped out of high school in my senior year with 6 months till graduation because I was under immense pain daily from an illness that I have been battling on and off for the past 8 years. One afternoon, I was discussing with my brother who would take the car out that day, as we only have one car. My mother told me that I was a loser and that I will never amount to anything, so I should just let my brother use the car because at least he has a future. No, sorry. I'm hoping my friend with benefits will become more serious about our relationship. At the time, I was devastated. She was the first woman I felt super comfortable around. Turns out I wasn't meant for her, and I've grown as a person because of her rejection. I've learned to value myself more and not jump at the first person who shows a sign of romantic interest. The friends with benefits, by the way, didn't get more serious, since I'm sure somebody will ask. I know I'm late to the sub, but I still want to contribute. Fix your speech impediment, and maybe I'll be your girlfriend. I understand that people get rid of speech impediments through lots of practice, but this was said to me in elementary school. I was young, and I really liked this girl. It was the closest thing I've had to a girlfriend. I'm in college now, and my speech impediment is still around. One of my first crushes that lowered my self-esteem. When I was 18, my dad told me the story about when he was splitting up with my mom back when I was 4. He took me out for a movie. On the way back, apparently I turned and looked him dead in the eye and told him, "Please don't go away, Daddy. I'll make Mommy stop being mean to you if you just stay." I didn't even remember saying any of that, but hearing it struck a chord for some reason. Please consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Love.